today, Tony and I are going to take you on a bit of a whiz through a look at the climate emergency from the viewpoint of Indigenous people, many from the global south, places like, and also Australia and the US, and also looking at Tony's history and knowledge of Kenya and where he's from. So we hope to be able to show you injustices perpetrated by the colonising mentality of land acquisition, extractivism and unquestioning economic growth must be addressed in order for communities around the world to determine for themselves how they adapt to and manage the consequences of rising CO2 levels. And the thing is about how they manage and how they adapt to is key in this talk as well. And later on, we want to explore with you whether solutions that some Indigenous people are demanding could have relevance to the problems we experience in this country and in the global north. And we didn't talk about this, but we might actually throw some questions out to you as well, or ask for your thoughts at various points. And so now I'm going to introduce you to Tony. Some of you may not know him, but I expect a lot of you will. He's probably best known for his awareness raising and community focused work through Diversity Lewes as the founder and chair. Diversity Lewes organised the large Black Lives Matter vigil in Lewes during the summer, paying tribute to George Floyd, who was brutally murdered by a policeman. Tony speaks several languages. He is a community interpreter and translator for Swahili speakers, and also speaks the Mijikenda vernacular and the Bajuni dialect. He has a degree in tropical agriculture, postgraduate certificate in community engagement and enterprises, and has just completed his master's degree in curating collections and heritage. Congratulations. It doesn't stop there. The list goes on. So Tony's also the curator for the Obsidian Collections, which is a black image archive based in Chicago that's working on stock photographs promoting positive black images online. Additionally, Tony has been appointed as chief negotiator for the return of the Vegango from the private and public collections globally. And we will talk about the Vegango, so don't ask me at the moment. They'll come up later in the talk, and Tony will enlighten us and educate us then. And of course, some of you might know Tony through his incarnation as a DJ, making you dance to amazing music from all over the world, and in previous years also doing Rocket FM for magical entertainment show.
Exactly, yeah.
So here he is, Tony, and let's start with you, shall we?
Yeah, so thank you for coming over. I'll briefly talk about my upbringing, because I grew up in Kenya and came in England when I was around 35, so I never left Kenya. Well, I lived in Aleppo, and then I came over to Kenya, but then I'm a product of the colonialism, because when I was born, it wasn't still independent, so I grew up on the coasts of Kenya, which is Kilifi district, and my dad comes from Malindi, that side, and my mom comes from somewhere here, near Uganda. So it's like a Swedish guy, and then we're all black, but my mom and dad language is different from, so that's a product of my upbringing, and it's very interesting, because I grew up in around the Mount Kenya area, which was full of Mau. When you look at the Kilifi County, we've got 9 tribes, which we call ourselves the Mijikenda. So I come from the Kambe tribe. So it is part of our culture that I want to talk about, the beauty of having a culture and then looking at climate change and our culture. So I'll do a whistle top two of it because I won't be very, exactly, yeah. So that's the first slide, and then going to my father. He did a foundation degree in theology at New York Theology. Yeah. Yeah, he did his master's in theology at New York during 1968, and there's a time where Martin Luther King came and visited the college, and he actually had time to spend with him before he died. So this is something that for me it's such a feeling to know that my dad did an MA during those time, and then he became a provost at the Mombasa Cathedral, and he became the first ordained priest to ever become an MP during the elections in 1970. So we moved from Mombasa, we went to Malindi, and I went to high school in Kilifi County. So I lived in Mombasa, I've lived in Malindi. Mombasa is the port city. During that time we used to have the Navy coming over. We used to have the latest fashion, the latest music. Everything was good in Mombasa. Mombasa was so vibrant. It's changed so much, but still it is vibrant. So I did my A-levels in Mombasa, and then I did my foundation degree in tropical agriculture in Embu. And then I became a civil servant for the government. So I worked for the Ministry of Agriculture as an extension officer. And then I became I left civil service, and then I became a public broadcaster. So I used to have my own show on the KBC, which was the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation equivalent, every Tuesday morning. So that's my childhood, So I lived in Limuru, which is where, I don't know if anybody knows Ngugi wa Thiong'o. He's a very famous writer, and he was detained by the regime of Kenyatta and then also Moi. And that's where we saw most of the actions with the Mau Mau, because they wanted, we call them Mau Mau, but it was the Kenya Freedom Land Army. They wanted to fight, so there's quite a lot of that's been written about Mau Mau. So yeah, there's Caroline Elkin's book. It's called I don't know, has anybody read this book? Okay, it's about how the British Empire, really dealt with insurgents and terrorism. That's what they used to call them. And Churchill was the prime minister at that time, and he ordered the carpet bombing of the Mount Kenya region, and so many people were killed regardless of whether they were in the fight or not. So this is just a history of colonialism within Kenya.
So, and you were growing up in the region that was the homeland, really, for the Mau Mau, was it? Or
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
And you were a child during that time. Do you remember that affecting you? Do you remember how it was?
Yeah, the thing is, because my dad was a priest, so he was at the theological college in doing his foundation degree. And during the 60s, 70s, between the 60s and 70s, there's just before 63, because Kenya got independent in 63. So I was like 3 years old, but I could understand, don't go out in the night, You could hear the sirens, you could hear the bombs, you could hear and also the newspapers and all these stories. So we've really frightened of the Mau Mau, So it's that kind of, I grew up aware of that, And then in school also we were taught about colonial legacy, So the thing is, I was going to emphasize is that when independence came in 1963, all the schools' headmasters were white. The administration was white. So there was no change. It was just like they came to Lancaster House and signed a treaty where we're giving back your land, But most of the administration, it was the same. The district officer was white, and then all the other civil servants were black, So the head of the office was always white. The The permanent secretaries were white. In the army, you find all these, so you can see even in some schools, the teachers were white. So there was no change in administration. It was just making sure that the colonialism wasn't there. So when you talk about decolonization, that's exactly what we feel this is decolonization. But my talk is about changing attitudes. So it has been abused. The decolonization has been used sometimes very erroneously, not the way it's supposed to be. So here we're calling decolonization out, in a way that it is going to be changed, not just the way colonialism ended and it started. That's why I was talking about Ngugi wa Thiong'o. His book is called Decolonizing the Mind. I don't know if anybody has read that one. Another book you should read.
Yeah.
So these are the things I'd like to highlight on my talk.
Yeah, so actually, even though that colonial system supposedly, or the colonialists left, that in fact all the systems remained the same, the thinking, the hierarchy of white people having more power remains the same, and that's where we call out the idea of decolonization. It isn't just about getting rid of structures. It is actually about a whole sort of way of thinking about people and land that we're trying to address.
Yeah. And even
address.
schools, because the schools, the examination was marked in Cambridge. So it was the Cambridge, we could see on the letterheads, Cambridge Examination Board. So it was marked in Kenya.
Yeah.
Well, it was marked in Kenya, but the idea was that Cambridge was the elite, this is what you should aspire for.
Yeah.
So that white supremacy was widely,
So if we go back a little bit, you talked about your ancestral homeland and the Mijikenda people. Yeah, and there's something that I wanted to bring up here was the Kaya forests, wasn't it? So could you tell us a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, this is very interesting because before colonialism, people had been living for years and years and millenniums and millenniums, within a system which was very eco-friendly, and the whole idea of having because it is a tropical forest, so it's quite near the sea, so it's quite big forest, and especially during the slave trade, people used to run from the village when they're out in their farms. They used to run into the village and hide, And some of these trees had pharmacological value, There was various. I mean, it was quite a vibrant way of maintaining the ecosystem. So the Kaya forests, even the United Nations has actually depicted them as things that should be preserved, But then the whole point is that the Kaya forests were a refuge where people could go and pray. So these were the cathedrals. So the tall trees, that's where the people used to pray to their spirits. We used to say them Koma, and it is quite interesting to see how some of these things, when colonialism came, they were regarded as evil or devilish, and you have to be Christianity. So you can imagine how people had to change their attitude and follow the status quo, which was the colonialists. And the colonialists had the power, they had the gun, and they were killing the people who were against them.
So it wasn't just about needing to extract the wood from the forest or wanting the land. It was also actually about destroying a way of thinking for people about their connection with their land as well. Is that sort of what was happening? So in the sense that people had an idea of their whole environment was complete for them. It held the sacred, it held food, it held sanctuary, and medicinal use.
And spiritualism too,
Yeah.
because that's where people used to go and, give their pledge or worship, in the forest. So there were special rituals. You couldn't go into the forest with certain clothes. You have to wear, certain things. You have to do a cleansing thing before you go into the forest. So it was like going to church. There was a whole kind of ritual there, and it was broken. There was the dancing, there was the meditation, there was all these things that,
Which brings us onto the Vigango, actually, at
Yes.
this point now, doesn't it? So I'll let you tell us about these.
So the structures you see here are actually made when one of the elders dies. Within the Mijikenda community, we have different societies of elders, and these elders were taken as leaders. So when they died, this was carved, and you see the longer they are, the more important they were. But you can see the markings had, they call it the triangle, which is the tree. It's just like the Christianity, the Trinity. But you can see the triangle is all over, and then there's the 7. So these ones were actually spirits of dead people, so they were regarded as the dead person. So every time you wanted to have a drink, because our people like palm wine. So when we drink a palm wine, you have to throw some on the ground, ablution, which is called kuhasa. Now these ones are at the homestead of the place where, the people drink. And when you're going to eat, you also put something there. And then you can see the piece of cloth is from the dead person's wardrobe. So it was actually a person, and it was carved by hardwood. I did my dissertation on this because it's quite interesting, because during the 1980s, it became like a fetish by Hollywood stars to have a Vigango as something to talk about, during parties. So people started stealing these Vigangos, and they were taken to museums because people realized that they are not artifacts, they are not a work of art. So there's quite a lot of, that's why I was given the role of making sure we return them. So we've done a census, and there are around 400 of them in America. And I don't know how many are in, I haven't done the census in England yet, and Japan, and Russia, and all that. So that's my job anyway. So the Vigango shows the spirit, the way in the Kaya people used to go and go to a tree and speak to the spirit of the tree. And that's, I use the one for my dad's Kigango. Kigango is one. And the way they talk, if it's the right one, then the diviner says, yeah, this is the right one. If it's not the right one, it goes to the next tree and asks. And this is hardwood, ebony, and really hardwood, because they didn't want it to be eaten by termites. So we talk about traditional knowledge?
Yeah, let's talk about traditional knowledge,
Yeah.
because sort of what you've painted a picture of here is a people very connected in all aspects of their being with their land, and the trees and the forest that grows up around them. And they have developed that knowledge and evolved that knowledge through living in close proximity and intimacy with that land. And what sort of is coming up in academic studies now, and you're going to hear about it a lot more if you haven't already, is this thing that's called traditional ecological knowledge. So yeah, tell us about that then.
Yeah, this is, well, I'll go, I won't go really deep, because it's something that's, it's a natural way of managing the land. Because as I said, people have been living on the land for the last millenniums, since time memorial. And we didn't have any problems with what we are having now, so there was no kind of trash or things, everything was being used. You could conserve the area, you could get the medicine from the trees, like quinine and all these mushrooms and everything. All these were regarded as part of the, goods from the forests, and it wasn't exploiting. You just go there and get what you want. So this knowledge, there's simple things like observing termites. You know that when you look at the termites moving around, they're running away from the rain. The rains are going to come. I've experienced cows dancing just before the rains, and it's such a feeling to see them dancing, and it's something, I don't know how nobody has captured it. It's all in my imagination, but I feel like now with all this technology, somebody must capture this. And the way they move and dance, because they know green grass is going to come after a long time. So there are things that we don't see anymore because we're not observant anymore. We're just stuck on our own, So this is the holistic outlook that we need to follow. Go back to nature.
Yeah. And it takes being studied in academia.
Yeah,
for us to value it
more
as well.
research, yeah.
and I mean, we look around us, and we've known for many years that Indigenous populations have very good ways of controlling their environments and their biodiversity. And you've probably heard of stick fires or coal burning. It's practiced in a lot of cultures across the world. Here we've got an Aboriginal gentleman practicing it, and it's a way of controlling stopping those huge wildfires that we're seeing everywhere. And it also is a great way of increasing biodiversity in your area as well. So, I mean, that's been going on for thousands of years. Now we're beginning to recognise that people actually have always had knowledge and resources about their land. But when the whole colonialist epoch happened, people were also taken from their lands or moved from their lands, displaced from their lands, and that breaks a line of knowledge that people once had as well.
So the thing is, when the colonialists came, they brought the idea of own your land. So everything was demarcated. This plot is yours, this plot is yours, this, so the idea of communal went away. Now it was capitalism coming in, giving everybody, fighting for, land and grabbing land. And that's where things like this were lost, because it was no longer a communal thing. It was mine, this is my land, instead of being our land.
Yes. So you the idea of community has very little value because the individual becomes more important and the individual profiting from that as well. But also, I think what I'm quite interested in what you've talked about with the Kaya forest and people managing their own land is that the land is tied up with people's health in these communities, isn't it? Yeah. So, our current or the global north's, US, Europeans' idea of health is very much about the individual. The health of the individual is physical, social, and the mental well-being of them, and not just the absence of disease. Well, that's fine, but actually, what we have often in Indigenous communities is a much more holistic, global idea of health. I hope you can all read that, but I'll read it out. So it's not just the physical well-being of an individual, but refers to the social, emotional and cultural well-being of the whole community, in which each individual is able to achieve their full potential as a human being, thereby bringing about the total well-being of their community. It is also a whole life view and includes the cyclical concept of life, death, life. And I think for me, something about that idea of health then says how devastating it must be to lose that connection with your land.
Yeah, the fact is that it's like a heartbeat, you know. So most people say music is a heartbeat, but having the drum and the connection, that's the heartbeat. Now having the land there and the connection with the rhythm of life, you know, the healing and the well-being, the morning and the evening. No, there's a rhythm in life, but we're losing it because, yeah, it's the fun and the music in the forest is no longer there. You know, you go to the clubs and there's not a holistic approach to living within that environment. We've lost it. That's all we're trying to show here.
And that idea of health, that when that disconnect takes place between the community and its land, that what we see in countless studies across the world of Indigenous communities is higher rates of disease, ill health, mental distress, etc. I mean, the rates are quite horrific, and there are lots of studies to show that as well. So, and later on we'll talk about food, because that's another area where people are, their health suffers because of how that colonialist mindset has infiltrated our food networks as well.
Yeah.
I think we want the next slide, don't we? Yeah. So environmental injustice. So unjust conditions can remove or restrict the ability of individuals and communities to function fully, and these conditions undermine health, destroy economic and cultural livelihoods, and present general environmental threats. So that's why we need climate justice to stop that.
Yeah.
Shall we ask people their thoughts before we go on?
Yeah, if there's any burning issue, if somebody wants to drop it. We're giving gaps, so we just don't talk. You're also allowed to come in with any insight.
So I'll just do a quick recap, and then if anybody's got any thoughts or wants to say something, then we can take a few moments to do that. So Indigenous people hold vital, valuable, traditional knowledge essential to their community's adaptation. So we're not just talking about, actually it would help the whole climate crisis. It's their own community's need to be able to adapt for themselves, and they actually do have that knowledge and can access that again. And that's their traditional ecological knowledge, their knowledge of the land, and their whole idea about what health is, which is as valid as ours for them, okay? And so later on we're going to look at land and its relationship to food sovereignty, but if anybody's got any thoughts now, then come.
Yeah, any
tell us.
insight, or if something had touched you and you feel like you want to talk, because it's good to have a discussion on this before we move on to the food sovereignty, but I don't mind to continue. Is there a question? Yeah?
It's not a question, it's just an observation that looking at how Indigenous peoples in other countries look at land and health, it makes me very, very sad for us in Europe, the way that our Indigenous knowledge and stuff has kind of more or less disappeared, and I know it started disappearing quite a long time ago, but we did have this relationship too here with our land, but it's so far away now and it's all been taken off us so completely that we can only think of it as some kind of mythical time. And the wonderful thing is that in certain parts of the world it's not mythical, it's actually there.
Yes.
And we need to really preserve it and respect it and value it and actually treasure it. But that doesn't seem to be what we're doing, and that's not a question, it's just an observation.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, very good. Thank you. Dirk?
I've got a question, Tony, about the distinction or discrepancy maybe between the colonisation of the Global South by the Global North and the suppression of Indigenous culture by governments in the Global South. For example, I don't know, if you take any country at random, you will see that their government is maybe aping the global north's way of governing.
Yeah.
So preventing people and actually facilitating and enabling the colonization of or the environmental and destruction and the economic colonization of their own country. Surely, I mean, this is not a criticism at all, but I'm wondering where the leverage is here. You know, if the Kenyan government, for example, stopped the Canadians and the Dutch and whoever they are coming in and exploiting areas of land, that the people wouldn't be driven off their land and they would be able to continue to live as they had done traditionally. Is that a relevant question, do you think?
It is a question, but the thing is, because the fact is, it never went away. You know, the colonialism is still there. It's called neo-colonialism now. You know, so the people who are controlling the World Bank and the IMF, even the United Nations, you know, they maintain the same boundaries that were done in 1800s by the Scramble for Africa, something like that. You know, so the British, the Germans, and the Italians and the Belgians sat down and decided we're going to carve this like a piece of cake. You know, so one indigenous Maasai was there and one minister was there. So these things we know because I was talking about Bigango, and this is recent. You know, they were returned from Denver University, and the Kenyan government said you've got to pay $50,000 to get them in, and that shows that we don't care. We don't want this back. These are all old, ancient, you know, black magic. You know, we don't need these things, and they're cultural things. So you can imagine that happening, and places like DRC Congo, where people extract cobalt, like, you know, very cheaply compared to in Russia. They have to dig deep. Same thing, divide and rule and mercenaries. So I understand your question is that how can we get these countries to get back this traditional thing, and at the same time they're the ones who are steeped in the capitalism helped by Tony Blair, David Cameron. They're the ones who are gaining from this kind of capitalism. So it's going to be hard, but yeah, we're getting there. We know the problem and we're trying to find a solution. You know, but it is dug deep in capitalism and the way the whole status quo works around the, you know, money and everything. Yes.
Oh, I think we had a question.
Oh, well, fine. Yeah, I was just in light of what the last question was, made me think I've been reading about what I've been reading about to do with Sudan recently. What I've heard that the people that have organised the coup are doing it to make it much easier for Western companies, multinationals, to exploit resources in Sudan, and that's why a lot of people in Sudan, millions, are resisting the coup. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that kind of resistance and how that can maybe protect Sudanese resources from this kind of carve-up that seems to be wanting to be organised by the generals that have just organised the coup.
It is quite sensitive because in Kenya most people were actually killed because they were resisting against the system, and in Kenya somebody's life is like £5 I can get somebody killed, you know. So you can imagine the government. There's a lady, she was a white woman, and there's a picture of her clinging on a bulldozer. They were clearing the Kiambu forest, you know, and then 2 weeks later she was found dead, and people know exactly she was killed because one of the politicians wanted to clear the area so they could build houses. So there are collaborators within collaborators, and it's such a sensitive topic. That's why you don't see it. This lady, I don't know if anybody have heard about this. She was actually killed, and up to now the police haven't done any investigation towards her death. You know, it's that sad. So we do have issues around. the politicians. Yeah.
I think it, an assumption is often made that a country is now independent, that its people are governing it, and therefore everything must be fine. The fact is that those governments are trapped in the same trap that often these global north governments are. If the multinational corporations are pulling loads of strings, hold loads and loads of money and resources, and so does the World Bank. And also, there is still in people's mind that they have the right to say that that lifestyle is not good and we can take that land. And it's as much about that sort of ideology that still permeates a lot of governments throughout the world, fueled with an idea that they can make vast amounts of money for their families or themselves. And I think that can't, you know, that it's the decolonisation is not about, as we said earlier, about just getting rid of a structure. It's about changing a whole way of thinking about the world as well.
Attitude and all
Yeah.
these things.
So we'll move on into the next section now, and I'll try not to get in your way too much. I'm sorry. Let's shall we move on, Dawn? Thank you. So here we go. Just a sort of a recap again. Why do we need to listen to views of Indigenous peoples? Well, the global north are not taking responsibility for their past actions, and we know, and even at COP they're still umming and ahhing, aren't they, about how much reparations one should pay. How, you know, 100 billion was discussed years ago, still not anywhere near that. Don't get into thinking that the global north will solve all these problems, because it cannot. And we need to listen to solutions from the global south. And again, repeating that colonial attitude of knowing what's best for the world is not going to help us or anyone else. Land.
Yeah, this is quite
Yeah,
interesting.
we're going to talk about. So when you came, in June when we were doing this talk, Tony came round. We were sort of chatting about what we'd like to include in it, and I had this beautiful vase of Kenyan roses sitting on the dining room table, and then you said to me, well, take these roses for example, and so let's start there with these roses, shall we?
Yeah, rose growing in Kenya. This is quite interesting because most people go to Waitrose or Tesco or something and they buy roses and it's written fair trade. Now, the thing is, having a degree in tropical agriculture, I did part of my studies on cash crops. So growing coffee, tea, and pyrethrum, sisal, and roses, of course. My principal had a degree in floriculture, so he was very passionate about flowers and everything. So here we come thinking that we are having fair trade because it's written fair trade. But mind you, fair trade is something that's quite controversial because it's something, it's like an accreditation that that coffee is fair trade, that cocoa is fair trade, that chocolate is fair trade. It means that the guys who own that land, or the ones growing that land, have workers. So the workers who are working there have a dispensary, they have a school, and they have, of course, living wage, you know. And the people around that area can't access those facilities because it's either your father has to be working, your mother has to be working, or you have to be a child of a worker because you're given a card or something to show that you're part of it. So not everybody could walk into those dispensaries. Not everybody could go to that school, you know. So it's not benefiting the community. And fair trade means that it's fair trade for everybody. So, okay, I've started on that level, but when we look at the ecology now, rose plants need water. And you see that's a greenhouse. They need pest control. That means spraying chemicals. Now you can imagine the water table lowering, and then spraying of chemicals just because you want Valentine's red roses to be. They shouldn't have any holes. They should be proper roses. So what do? You spray them. You spray them. You spray them till they get out of that. Even sometimes when they're going on the plane, there's still some chemicals to make sure that they don't carry stuff, bags, and everything. So it's so sad to know that you're not going to eat them, but you're bringing stuff that's full of chemicals, and because the trade is so lucrative and all that, nobody will. Well, you're not going to eat it, so they don't care. So it's pumped full of chemicals. The water table has gone down, and that's what you buy when you go to. I don't say don't buy roses, but think now before you buy those flowers. These people are, of course, they're getting a good education for the children and all that, but it's a niche people who are getting. And somewhere like Naivasha now, if you go onto the lakes, you find that it's actually a dust bowl because the water table has been depleted, and they move to the next area. They don't care, so long as the land is there, they can grab, and now they're encroaching into the national parks and making, because it's such a big money spinner,
And it's not just roses, is it?
It's not only roses. That's what I said. It's all the other cash. We call them cash crops.
Cash crops.
Because you don't eat them in Kenya. Those crops are taken out of Kenya and processed and then brought back into the country. So things like simple vegetables and all that people, that's not grown for the community. It's grown for the Sainsbury's and the markets, in England.
And so, of course, what you have here is actually, even if that land was given back to indigenous communities, it's been decimated. It's desert. And so, the idea of not making reparation for creating that much destruction to land feels quite ludicrous.
Yeah, but it's owned by the politicians.
Yeah.
The big guys who own it. So.
Can I say not ludicrous but criminal? Isn't it criminal?
It's criminal. But
shouldn't there be laws and to prevent all of these corrupt practices? And I mean, it goes.
Yes, I think most of us here would really like to see.
But who makes the laws?
Yeah.
The owners. So it's sad.
And your description of fair trade reminded me of when I went to India a few years ago. We went on one of these tourist things where you went up the mountain to a tea plantation, which was, I think everyone took great pride in the fact that it was as it was when the English were there growing the tea. Well, they weren't growing the tea, of course. But so it was very nice. The workers had little homes, and there was a little clinic, and there was a school, and so on. And it's just like, well, so is what's going on with a lot of this stuff that's fair trade as well. It's just, again, it's that system, that mindset. We'll look after people that work for us, and we're paying them a living wage according to this country. But what about all the people that have been evicted from their land in order for those massive greenhouses to go up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have security guards who actually sometimes kill people, because they say you're not allowed to come here, and people know they want to go in. So, it's been hard, but then
Yeah.
Even in conservation, because there's places like in Laikipia where people have land where they conserve an animal. They say like the giraffe or the rare white rhino or something. So they use one animal in a big area where it defeats the purpose, because the whole idea was that these animals should be able to move around, and that's what eco-friendly means, different animals moving around. But because of poaching and all that, they say they're saving the animals. So it's all conservation in particular areas where it's a what you call it,
monoculture.
Yeah, monoculture. And it's sad that we still have them. There are people who actually get funded, because they're protecting the white rhino or the black rhino. And then the thing is, all the indigenous, like the Maasais now, they've realized that they have to live with the environment. They used to live with the environment. They know how to live with the environment. So trickle by trickle, you find the government says, okay, you guys, you can have your own communal, conservation area where human beings and the animals can live together, without having to work. So it's true. There's a change coming, but it's slow, very slow, but it's happening. There's some places where you can see the population living with the animals. So
But that change, it is slow, and it has come at quite a price.
Yeah.
Because we had a fantastic speaker here from Survival International last week who was talking basically about fortress conservation, but the reason that there's now a little trickle is because, again, studies have shown that actually the species you want to protect thrive better when they have a community of people that look after the land, because they're actually encouraging biodiversity and other animals and a more, could you imagine, more holistic environment for the tiger or whatever it is you're trying to say to live in. And so it's sort of, it's like, okay, so now we've got science coming in, now we can believe that this can happen. But it's still, Survival International, the speaker Fiona, who was here the other day, was telling us about countless projects around the world, countless activists trying to save their areas of land or forest, because, people like the World Wildlife Fund think that a species needs protecting. So the struggle is really prevalent there. I think we want the next slide. So, we skipped a bit, but it's all right, isn't it? We're on to food injustice now. So, another social and climate justice issue, food. I was recently, when I wrote this, I was recently at a local action. So it's a few months ago I was at an action, and a member of the public claimed that there wasn't enough food to feed everyone in the world. And I think this is a perception that many people have. Have we got it up? Yes, this is the reality. Read it for yourselves. The world's agricultural production exceeds the food needs of our current population. On a per capita basis, food availability is actually increasing. So what's going on? Food's not just being distributed equitably, is it? So a few people get loads of food and the rest not enough. And that leads us to talk about food sovereignty.
yeah, this is quite interesting, because I was looking at ways how we've GMO, genetically modified our food. In that we have certain categories. The bananas should be this way. Carrots should be that way. Orange. And it's the standard. We think that's how food is. But if I go back to when I was growing up, I used to find corn that was red, yellow, purple, green, colorful corn. Something really unique. But then we started standardizing. Everything has to be categorically good for the supermarket. These days you see wobbly potatoes and things like that. It's changing, but still we've got a long way to go. So this is what you're trying to say. People grow things that they like, but then the system doesn't allow that. It has to be all regimental, and You know, you have to import bananas from here. You've got to get things from there. You've got to do this. So it's quite
And
interesting.
we were talking the other day, weren't we, that actually a lot of Kenya now, the starch food, Tony, is rice, isn't it? And it would not have it's not an indigenous food to Kenya, rice, but it's that idea, so food sovereignty is also about what is right for your land and what you traditionally have eaten in that area, because otherwise we just have these mass markets of food being shipped around for somebody to make money from and sold to you, because now we don't let you grow your own food.
It's true. Things like cassava or yam, which was the staple food. Now it's been taken over by rice and pasta. And pasta comes from, wheat and all that,
Exactly.
So it's not grown there, it's brought in, maybe from Brazil or somewhere, and that's what gives so much pain about sovereignty, because people are used to their kind of food, you have your cassava, you have your yam, you have your, and then suddenly you can't have it because you can't grow it, you don't have the land to grow, because the land is all, used for commercial usage.
So what we have, sorry, can we go back to that slide, Donna? So Indigenous people are, and we talked about women earlier, it was in relation to a football club, but actually, Diana pointed out, women are usually the land workers in the majority of countries across the world. So women farmers, migrants, all over the world, they're mobilising around this issue of food sovereignty. They've lost the right and ability to attain their own food due to that colonisation and that neo-colonialism and capitalism, I have to say, because it's food corporations, multinationals that do this all the time, and then the failure of their own national systems and governments to ensure that they maintain their skills and traditional ways of growing food and ensuring their own food security. Which is a big problem, and it's a big problem for this country also as well.
I don't know how many people know about Monsanto, because Monsanto is a very big company that actually, what it does, because I used to tell the farmers, you have to use hybrid seeds, get rid of this all the indigenous seeds, they don't have a bigger, but then the whole point was that you have to use fertilizer, you have to use Roundup, which is bad, but then you see they now control the seeds they give to the farmers. So they're told, and the thing is, the old style was that if you grow your crop, the same seeds you grow, you can grow again. But now with hybrid, once it's grown, you can't grow again. You have to buy another seed from them, Monsanto. So they control the. Oh, it's horrible. But then that's what they do. They control completely the whole system. Yeah.
So let's look at a community. Tony, tell us about the Karuk.
Well, the Karuk people, this is interesting because these are, they live in the mountains in California, and they're indigenous natives of America, and we always say time immemorial, because that's the whole point, is that these guys have been living in this area, thriving, eating salmon, sturgeon, steelhead, lamprey, all this rich, forest food resources, and they were among the wealthiest people in the region because they are big and tough, and they were known all over California. This is America we're talking about, and they manage their practices quite well, and the environment and fishing, they make sure that they let the little ones grow before they fish. There's all this management, and also they use the fire to control the fires, and then also had ceremonial practices. So it's like our culture. So that's why I'm very touched with what they done. They had these ceremonies, using spirits of the bear, the eagle, you know, the same thing that we used with our trees, they used with the animals, you know. So looking at the way they had been surviving for all those years, we see that even the burning also contributed to the acorns and the bulbs, you know, getting preserved, because it wasn't a big fire, it was just a way to reduce a catastrophe, you know, and to allow no fail during harvesting. So in the invention of the Europeans, you know, during the 1850s, you know, because it's just recently, the circumstances changed. They couldn't do that anymore. They had to own the land. It's like in Kenya. They demarcated it. Colonialism came. They had to put everything. I own this land. I own, this is your land. This is your land, you know. So people changed. And today, Karuks are among the poorest people. And they are very hungry. And they're like 90% of tribal members live below the poverty line. And that's really sad, because these were rich, proud, you know, people, and now they're like it's like, for me, I feel like it's a genocide. You know, the colonialism has killed these people, because now they just depend on handouts from and their culture is damaged, and the traditional knowledge is no longer there, as Ewan said. You know, the relationship with the land is non-existent. You know, it's as you say, it's a myth now. You know, and it pains you to know that all this thing has happened for the last 400 years. You know, just a short time. You know, that's how fast we can finish this planet. Yeah.
It's awful, isn't it? So, you know, so with that land grab and that loss of your community's ability to feed itself, you destroy a whole community. Also, you probably face less resistance, don't you, as well? So let's look at what's being done about food sovereignty. The Forum for Food Sovereignty met in Mali in 2007. Did anyone know about that? No, I didn't know about it either, and I'm just amazed at how ignorant I am about Indigenous people and what they're trying to do to actually make their voices heard throughout the world, and for how long. So 500 delegates from the 5 continents, representing 80 countries and all sectors of society with an interest in agriculture and food issues, met in February 2007. And it was seen as an opportunity to reaffirm the right to food sovereignty and to clarify its economic, social, ecological and political implications. And what they tried to do was create an international process whose aim was to achieve recognition of the right to food sovereignty. And the organisers made a very deliberate decision to hold this meeting in Africa, where agriculture plays a central role and where numerous rural and urban families suffer from a hunger despite the abundance of natural resources on the continent. And Mali was chosen at the time, it's not the case now, but it was a democratic country where civil society organisations and other types of trade unions enjoyed freedom of action and expression. And Mali was actually at that time also one of the first countries in the world to have made food sovereignty a policy priority in its agricultural framework law. So, how many of you knew about this one as well? I didn't know about it either. So there was a World People's Conference on Climate Change, Cochabamba, in 2010. That's in Mexico. No, Bolivia.
Bolivia.
I'm so sorry, Bolivia. And the Rights of Mother Earth was a global gathering of civil society and governments hosted by the government of Bolivia. The point, so it's about recognising that actually Indigenous people have been trying to get our attention, and we've just got to be a bit more aware of the places that they're speaking and what they're saying as well. So the event was actually attended by around 30,000 people from 100 countries, and it was viewed as a response to what some said were the failed climate talks during COP15 all those years ago. And one of the important objectives of the conference was to produce proposals for new commitments to the Kyoto Protocol. And so the conference actually devised something called a People's Agreement. I think, is that, I'm not sure if that's another slide or not. Or maybe it isn't.
Oh, yes.
Is that it? Oh, there it is, yeah. So we can see humanity confronts a great dilemma to continue on the path of capitalism, and I know a lot of people don't like us to say capitalism is the problem. But anyway, it's there. Well, it is, isn't it? But we're sometimes told, as activists, maybe don't say that. Capitalism, depredation and death, or to choose the path of harmony with nature and respect for life. Urgent action is needed to achieve this vision. With the support of peoples, movements and countries, developed countries should commit to ambitious targets for reducing emissions. It's a bit depressing, isn't it? To be standing here reading that. They said that in 2010. But people have voices, and we need to platform, and we need to listen.
Yeah, it is obvious. Yeah, we need to. There's so many concerns raised, about these things. We can see that we are not listening, and we need to be aware that most of these people need protection, because as we said earlier, some of these people, the politicians, actually are against any of these things. So there's no protection for the indigenous peoples. So forums like this need to be more, vibrant, more out into the media. You have to respect and recognize these things and then publicize them.
And I suppose what's, in this statement, I think we do get really caught up in we've got to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Well, it's bigger than that, isn't it? And so there's a public perception, well, we'll get to net zero, but actually all the other stuff is so important, and it's really important here and now in order to allow those communities to be able to adapt to what is going on here and now as well.
Yeah, the right to be free from pollution. It's something that is so simple, but do we do it? No, we just say, keep on driving, keep on burning fuel, keep on. The role of historical responsibility and restorative justice, it's such a big responsibility and a commitment, and most people don't want to commit. It's easier to ignore it.
I mean, the historical responsibility, even a few times, in recent weeks with COP26 happening, we've been hearing, but, China's now the biggest emitter. It's like, well, there's always got to be a but, hasn't there, to actually making just reparations for what we have historically put out into the world as well. All right, so that's our little recap, isn't it?
Yeah.
The focus on capacity building in affected societies, including looking after the health of people, land, food, access to land. I think people can save or help themselves, and if we're all of us adapting to a changing world, then we have to allow these communities to have the resources to adapt in a way that suits them, and not think that we can helicopter in our solutions as well. Let's break there. Oh, maybe not. Shall I show you the martini glass, which you all know?
You know that, don't you? The richest 10% responsible for almost half of the total lifestyle consumption emissions, and the poorest 50%. So another argument about justice there. Let's take some thoughts from you all.
Can I make a point? All the themes we've been discussing tonight, I mean, most people think about settler colonialism applying to Kenya, the global south, Australia, New Zealand, etc. But a lot of people don't realise that the same applies to Israel and Palestine, whereby indigenous people basically have been colonised by mainly an incoming population. I've circulated a leaflet round to people tonight, which was produced in relation for the forthcoming, the current COP26. I'm a member of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, and this was leaflet specifically produced in relation to the impact of climate change on Palestine. So basically, sort of since Israel was founded, it's the whole Palestinian biodiversity has been totally destroyed. Swamps have been drained, waterways destroyed, ecosystems are threatened. There's an overuse of water in desert areas. Native trees providing food have been uprooted and replaced by European pine trees that alter soil acidity and are susceptible to fire. You might have noticed on the news a few weeks ago whereby there were massive fires in Israel, and these were sort of, let's say, non-native pine trees which were destroyed by these fires, and lo and behold, underneath were these ancient terraces were discovered, which basically the trees being planted to hide the terraces, which were the original form of agriculture. Within West Bank settlements, raw sewage is actually left to pollute Palestinian land. There's release of toxic and carcinogenic chemicals. So all these things go on. I mean, currently it's the Palestinian olive is still the sort of main harvest, particularly on the West Bank. But Palestinian farmers go in fear of being attacked by settlers and having their trees uprooted and destroyed, which is going on, to this day. So I just wanted to, put this point, because a lot of people think, Israel-Palestine isn't seen in that category, but I mean, I'm here to tell you,
I think
it certainly is. We've got an indigenous population which is under military occupation in the main, and a brutal military occupation.
And also that whole region has such a history of colonial mastership as well, that divided up in the straight lines, etc.
British responsibility.
Exactly.
It was a mandated country after the First World War, and
British and French.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
With
Syria, that's right.
So, I mean, the pattern is exactly the same wherever in the world you want to place it.
Exactly, yeah.
And people do actually have ideas and knowledge that needs to be listened to. And so, as I think we should really wrap up a bit as well. So I'm going to sort of move on to the next bit, which is about as activists. Perhaps what do we do? Well, I know that a lot of us would quite like to cry, but when we get a bit of gumption, we've got to draw our sort of strength as well from the people that are on the front line, and there are lots of Indigenous groups who are resisting, and we need to make sure that they're in our networks as well, that we're listening to their voices, that where we can, we platform them, and we need to do that in a sensitive way as well. So if people are in danger, we don't expose them to further danger, that they take the lead on how they want to be platformed. And COP is a fiasco around this at the moment. I mean, all these people from all over the world, and they're not allowed anywhere near the negotiating tables. And as activists, we need to sort of say that's not good enough and make the places that we can let their voices be heard more strongly as well. And ultimately, concepts of climate justice must address the fundamental capability of Indigenous communities to sustain the lives and livelihoods they value. I think I'm not going to do that slide, Dolman. I think we'll leave it on that one. So, is that, I think that's...
Yeah, I was just going to touch on this thing that's been going on. The Green Belt movement, which was led by Wangari Maathai, and she was at the forefront of making sure that the environment, and this is like 30 years ago, you know, but we still didn't hear her till she died, you know, so it's sad that she got a Nobel Prize, but still now is when people are waking up to this is your wake-up call. Yes, I think we've wrapped it up by 12. Unless there's any burning issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sure someone else wants to say something. No? I think
Gary and then Dolman. Go.
Yeah, okay. Can I just quickly say that it's not all doom and gloom, as Fiona was saying, and I think the only thing, I mean, you know, obviously we've got to give a platform for what you both are saying, and I think it's absolutely essential that you've told us about this, because it's such an important burning issue that I didn't know much about. And I'm very grateful for listening to what you both had to say. It was wonderful and enlightening. Thank you so much, honestly. But I also want to say that, you know, we live in a democratic country, and there's the ballot box, and we can effect change, and that's the best way to do it. You know, if we don't want to seek violent ways, we all oppose violence of any kind, then let's do it democratically and put in power a government that cares for Indigenous people all over the world, not just in this country, but everywhere. And you know, there's got to be eventually the realization that the only way to replace this present government is to have an alliance of all the opposition together, because combined we are much bigger than them. And the sooner that happens, the sooner we can start effecting the changes that need to come as soon as possible. But I don't know, maybe I'm an idealist. Am I?
You're a dreamer.
Thank you, Gary. And Dolman, what did you want to say?
Well, I was thinking, you know, we were thinking about, you know, what can we do as activists, and I thought, because I guess everyone here is probably interested in this topic, I just wanted to mention to you that last week we had a premiere of a film which was talking about land defenders in Central and South America. And one of the things that we're thinking about and negotiating with the relevant people is there a way that a group of us in Lewes can get together to support maybe a community, one of those communities we saw in the film, or maybe someone who's supporting those communities, because obviously those things are happening, we can feel powerless, but we are looking for a particular way that we can help for that. And if you're interested, I wonder if I could invite you, we could put a bit of paper there for people to leave their emails, and we'll keep you informed with how that develops. And it may or may not be something that you're interested in subsequently, but if you'd like to know about the progress of that and the particular way we're exploring of supporting Indigenous communities that are being threatened by governments and corporations, and they're trying to defend their land. But please, just give us your details and we'll keep you in touch with that. Should we put a bit of paper out there?
Earlier this year in lockdown, I listened to a whole load of stuff about the Pan-African trade deal that I'd never heard of, and I have to say I'm not that well clued up on it. But what it ultimately said was that because of various things happening throughout Africa, although this Pan-African trade deal was much anticipated by people in Africa, it was coming to a deadline where it was going to be having to be ready, But the only people who were ready to take advantage of this Pan-African deal, which was supposed to be the salvation of Africa, were not actually Africans, but what were termed as external actors, which are all the same usual suspects ready to carve it up again. And the other thing that was really awful to hear was that 80% of subsistence farming in Africa, which is what feeds people's families, this is what I got from this conference, were women, and yet there were no women at the trade talks at all. So the women are actually providing for the communities, for the elderly, for the children. They are the community, and yet they're not at the trade talks. And we, who are the external actors across Europe and the global north, are not making sure that the people who are the communities are represented or talked about at all. So, you know, one of the things that we can do is have that knowledge that the people that should be, just the same as the Indigenous people should be at the talks. If there's anybody who should be at the talks, it's those people. We can write to our MPs, we can have it in our heads, we can talk about it, and we can want that to happen. And the other thing, I think, yes, it's great to be an idealist, but our current electoral system is no longer fit for purpose, if it ever was, which I doubt. It was just ceded power under pressure bit by bit. It was never a designed democracy for the people to represent the people, and nothing will happen here without electoral reform. And nobody ever talks about electoral reform, and yet it's the only thing that will change this absolute crap system to being representative. So there's social justice groups like Make Votes Matter and things that are campaigning to change the electoral system. And even the Labour Party has just tried to pass a PR, proportional representative motion. 80% voted in favour, but the unions didn't, so it wasn't passed. But people never want to talk about PR, but once again, please, you know, think about PR, be prepared to join in, talk about it with your families and friends, and just build up. You know, we never talk about politics or money or religion, but why not?
I agree.
Okay, I wasn't going to say anything else, but just on the points about democracy, I mean, I'd just like to counterpose revolution as a strategy to that. Seriously, very seriously, because I think when push comes to shove and whole countries such as island nations are faced with extinction, complete extinction, they're going to have no choice but do something pretty dramatic. And waiting for electoral reform in countries. I don't think the revolution will start here, by the way. I think it has already started in Sudan, as I mentioned earlier. That is a revolution. There's mass strikes, insurrections going on, shootings, whatever, from the military. It's a revolution. And if they do overthrow the Sudanese coup, they will stop the next stage in the carving up of Sudanese resources, and I wish them well. Also, imagine the effect that will have on Egypt and the revolution, defeated revolution there of 2011 and so on. That could spur on, and you could change things in Africa quite quickly through that. And I think the revolution will start in the global south because it's the most affected by global warming issues. And I think that as the more those things start to happen, the more that idea will gain traction, hopefully in this country as well, as opposed to electoral reform, forming an alliance of bourgeois Democrats or whatever, who I don't think can be relied on to do F4 really. So
Thanks, Andy.
I think we've got to
We've got to vacate. We've got 1 minute to vacate.
So name and email on there if you want to be kept informed about that. Thank you all for coming.